Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. 6 years have passed since we last joined Polly on her visit to the Shaw household. Now she is older, wiser, and ready to embark on a new adventure. This time she is planning to go around the city, making music all the time. At least, that is how one young woman puts it. Polly may need to earn her living, but she is always able to spread a little bit of joy and peace to those she meets. I think you'll like seeing the fine person Polly is becoming. And now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 8. 6 years afterward. "What do you think Polly is going to do this winter?" exclaimed Fanny, looking up from the letter she had been eagerly reading. "Going to deliver lectures on women's rights," said the young gentleman, who was carefully examining his luxuriant crop of decidedly auburn hair, as he lounged with both elbows on the chimney-piece. "Going to set her cap for some young minister and marry him in the spring," added Mrs. Shaw, whose mind ran a good deal upon matchmaking just now. "I think she's going to stay at home and do all the work, 'cause servants cost so much. It would be just like her," observed Maud, who could pronounce the letter R now. "In my opinion, she is going to open a school or something of that sort, to help those brothers of hers along," said Mr. Shaw, who had put down his paper at the sound of Polly's name. "Every one of you is wrong, though Papa comes nearest the truth," cried Fanny. "She's going to give music lessons and support herself, so that Will may go to college. He's the studious one, and Polly is very proud of him. Ned, the other brother, has a business talent and doesn't care for books, so he has gone out west and will make his own way anywhere. Polly said she isn't needed at home just now. The family is so small, and Kitty can take her place nicely, so she is actually going to earn her own living and hand over her share of the family income to Will. What a martyr that girl does make of herself!" And Fanny looked as solemn as if Polly had proposed some awful self-sacrifice. "She is a sensible, brave-hearted girl, and I respect her for doing it," said Mr. Shaw emphatically. "One never knows what may happen, and it does no harm for young people to learn to be independent." "If she's as pretty as she was last time I saw her, she'll get pupils fast enough. I wouldn't mind taking lessons myself," was the gracious observation of Shaw Jr., as he turned from the mirror with the soothing certainty that his objectionable hair actually was growing darker. "She wouldn't take you at any price," said Fanny, remembering Polly's look of disappointment and disapproval when she came on her last visit, and found him an unmistakable dandy. "You just wait and see," was the placid reply. "If Polly does carry out her plan, I wish Maud to take lessons of her. Fanny can do as she likes, but it would please me very much to have one of my girls sing as Polly sings. It suits old people better than your opera things, and Mother used to enjoy it so much." As he spoke, Mr. Shaw's eyes turned toward the corner of the fire where Grandma used to sit. The easy-chair was empty now. The kind old face was gone, and nothing but a very tender memory remained. "I'd like to learn, Papa, and Polly is a splendid teacher, I know. She's always so patient and makes everything so pleasant. I do hope she will get scholars enough to begin right away," said Maud. "When is she coming?" asked Mrs. Shaw, quite willing to help Polly, but privately resolving that Maud should be finished off by the most fashionable master in the city. "She doesn't say. She thanks me for asking her here as usual, but says she shall go right to work, and had better begin with her own little room at once. Won't it seem strange to have Polly in town, and yet not with us? We'll get her somehow. The little room will cost something, and she can stay with us just as well as not, even if she does teach. Tell her I say so, said Mr. Shaw. She won't come, I know, for if she undertakes to be independent, she'll do it in the most thorough manner, answered Fanny, and Mrs. Shaw sincerely hoped she would. It was all very well to patronize the little music teacher, but it was not so pleasant to have her settled in the family. I shall do what I can for her among my friends, and I dare say she will get on very well with young pupils to begin with. If she starts right, puts her terms high enough, and gets a few good names to give her the entree into our first families, I don't doubt she will do nicely. For I must say that Polly has the manners of a lady, observed Mrs. Shaw. She's a mighty taking little body, and I'm glad she'll be in town, though I'd like it better if she didn't bother about teaching, but just stayed here and enjoyed herself, said Tom lazily. I've no doubt she would feel highly honored to be allowed to devote her time to your amusement, but she can't afford expensive luxuries, and she doesn't approve of flirting, so you will have to let her go her own way and refresh herself with such glimpses of you as her engagements permit, answered Fanny, in the sarcastic tone which was becoming habitual to her. You're getting to be a regular old maid, Fan, as sharp as a lemon, and twice as sour, returned Tom, looking down at her with an air of calm superiority. Do be quiet, children. You know I can't bear anything like contention. Maud, give me my Shetland shawl and put a cushion at my back. As Maud obeyed her mother, with a reproving look at her erring brother and sister, a pause followed, for which everyone seemed grateful. They were sitting about the fire after dinner, and all looked as if a little sunshine would do them good. It had been a dull November day, but all of a sudden the clouds lifted, and a bright ray shot into the room. Everyone turned involuntarily to welcome it, and everyone cried out, "Why, Polly!" For there on the threshold stood a bright-faced girl, smiling as if there was no such thing as November weather in the world. "You dear thing, when did you come?" cried Fanny, kissing both the blooming cheeks with real affection, while the rest hovered near, waiting for a chance. "I came yesterday, and have been getting my nest in order, but I couldn't keep away any longer, so I ran up to say how do you do," answered Polly, in the cheery voice that did one's heart good to hear. "My Polly always brings the sunshine with her," and Mr. Shaw held out his hands to his little friend, for she was his favourite still. It was good to see her put both arms about his neck and give him a tender kiss on the cheek that said a great deal, for Grandma had died since Polly met him last, and she longed to comfort him, seeing how grey and old he had grown. If Tom had had any thoughts of following his father's example, something in Polly's manner made him change his mind and shake hands with the hearty, "I'm very glad to see you, Polly," adding to himself as he looked at the face in the modest little bonnet, "Prettier than ever, by Jove." There was something more than mere prettiness in Polly's face, though Tom had not learned to see it yet. The blue eyes were clear and steady, the fresh mouth frank and sweet, the white chin was a very firm one in spite of the dimple, and the smooth forehead under the little curls had a broad, benevolent arch, while all about the face were those unmistakable lines and curves which can make even a plain countenance comely, by breathing into it the beauty of a lovely character. Polly had grown up, but she had no more style now than in the days of the round hat and the rough coat, for she was all in grey, like a young Quakeress, with no ornament but a blue bow at the throat and another in the hair. Yet the plain suit became her excellently, and one never thought of the dress, looking at the active figure that wore it, for the freedom of her childhood gave to Polly that good gift, health, and every movement was full of the vigour, grace, and ease which nothing else can so surely bestow. A happy soul in a healthy body is a rare sight these days, when doctors flourish and everyone is ill, and this pleasant union was the charm which Polly possessed without knowing it. "It does seem so good to have you here again," said Maud, cuddling Polly's cold hand as she sat at her feet, when she was fairly established between Fanny and Mr. Shaw, while Tom leaned on the back of his mother's chair and enjoyed the prospect. "How do you get on? When do you begin? Where is your nest? Now tell all about it," began Fanny, who was full of curiosity about the new plan. "I shall get on very well, I think, for I've got 12 scholars to begin with, all able to pay a good price, and I shall give my first lesson on Monday." "Don't you dread it?" asked Fanny. "Not much. Why should I?" answered Polly stoutly. "Well, I don't know. It's a new thing, and must be a little bit hard at first," stammered Fanny, not liking to say that working for one's living seemed a dreadful hardship to her. "It will be tiresome, of course, but I shall get used to it. I shall like the exercise, and the new people and places I must see will amuse me. Then the independence will be delightful, and if I can save a little to help Kitty along, that will be the best of all." Polly's face shone as if the prospect was full of pleasure instead of work, and the hearty goodwill with which she undertook the new task seemed to dignify her humble hopes and plans, and make them interesting in the sight of others. "Who have you got for pupils?" asked Mrs. Shaw, forgetting her nerves for a minute. Polly named her list, and took a secret satisfaction in seeing the impression which certain names made upon her hearers. "How in the world did you get the Davenports and the Greys, my dear?" said Mrs. Shaw, sitting erect in her surprise. "Mrs. Davenport and Mother are relations, you know." "You never told us that before." "The Davenports have been away some years, and I forgot all about them. But when I was making my plan, I knew I must have a good name or two to set me going. So I just wrote and asked Mrs. D if she would help me. She came and saw us, and was very kind, and has got these pupils for me, like a dear good woman as she is." "Where did you learn so much worldly wisdom, Polly?" asked Mr. Shaw, as his wife fell back in her chair and took out her salts, as if this discovery had been too much for her. "Ha! I learned it here, sir," answered Polly, laughing. "I used to think patronage and things of that sort very disagreeable and not worth having, but I've got wiser. And to a certain extent, I'm glad to use whatever advantages I have in my power, if they can be honestly got." "Why didn't you let us help you in the beginning? We should have been very glad to, I'm sure," put in Mrs. Shaw, who quite burned to be known as a joint patroness with Mrs. Davenport. "I know you would, but you have all been so kind to me I didn't want to trouble you with my little plans till the first steps were taken. Besides, I didn't know as you would like to recommend me as a teacher, though you like me well enough as plain Polly." "Ah, my dear, of course I would, and we want you to take Maud at once and teach her your sweet songs. She has a fine voice, and is really suffering for a teacher." A slight smile passed over Polly's face as she returned her thanks for the new pupil, for she remembered a time when Mrs. Shaw considered her sweet songs quite unfit for a fashionable young lady's repertoire. "Where is your room?" asked Maud. "My old friend Miss Mills has taken me in, and I'm nicely settled. Mother didn't like the idea of my going to a strange boarding-house, so Miss Mills kindly made a place for me. You know she lets her rooms without board, but she's going to give me my dinners, and I'm going to get my own breakfast and tea quite independently. I like that way, and it's very little trouble. My habits are so simple. A bowl of bread and milk night and morning, with baked apples or something of that sort is all I want, and I can have it when I like." "Is your room comfortably furnished? Can't we lend you anything, my dear? An easy chair now, or a little couch, so necessary when one comes in tired," said Mrs. Shaw, taking unusual interest in the affair. "Thank you, but I don't need anything, for I brought all sorts of home comforts with me. Oh, Fan, you ought to have seen my triumphal entry into the city. sitting among my goods and chattels in a farmer's cart." Polly's laugh was so infectious that everyone smiled and forgot to be shocked at her performance. "Yes," she added, "I kept wishing I could meet you, just to see your horrified face when you saw me sitting on my little sofa, with boxes and bundles all around me, a bird cage on one side, a fishing basket with a kitten's head popping in and out of the hole on the other, and jolly old Mr. Brown, in his blue frock, perched on a keg of apples in front. It was a lovely bright day, and I enjoyed the ride immensely, for we had all sorts of adventures." "Oh, tell about it," begged Maud, when the general laugh at Polly's picture had subsided. "Well, in the first place, we forgot my potted ivy, and Kitty came running after me with it. Then we started again, but we were soon stopped by a great shouting, and there was Will racing down the hill, waving a pillow in one hand and a squash pie in the other. How we did laugh when he came up and explained that our neighbor, old Mrs. Dodd, had sent in a hop pillow for me, in case of headache, and a pie to begin housekeeping with. She seemed so disappointed at being too late that Will promised to get them to me, if he ran all the way to town. The pillow was easily disposed of, but oh, that pie! I do believe it was stowed in every part of the wagon, and never stayed anywhere. I found it in my lap, then on the floor next, upside down among the books, then just on the point of coasting off a trunk into the road, and at last it ended up in my rocking chair. Such a remarkable pie it was, too, for in spite of all of its wanderings, it never got split or broken, and we finally ate it for lunch in order to be left in peace. Next, my Kitty got away, and I had a chase over walls and brooks before I got her, while Mr. Brown sat shaking with fun to see me run. We finished off by having the bookshelves tumble on our heads as we went down a hill, and losing my chair off behind as we went up a hill. A shout made us pause, and looking back, there was the poor little chair rocking all by itself in the middle of the road, while a small boy sat on the fence and whooped. It was great fun, I do assure you. Polly had run on in her lively way, not because she thought her adventures amounted to much, but from a wish to cheer up her friends, who had struck her as looking rather dull and out of sorts, especially Mr. Shaw. And when she saw him lean back in his chair with the old hearty laugh, she was satisfied, and blessed the unlucky pie for amusing him. "Oh, Polly, you do tell such interesting things," sighed Maud, wiping her eyes. "I wish I'd have met you. I'd have given you 3 cheers and a tiger, for it must have been an imposing spectacle," said Tom. "No, you wouldn't. You'd have whisked around the corner when you saw me coming, or have stared straight before you, utterly unconscious of the young woman in the baggage wagon." Polly laughed in his face just as she used to when she said that, and in spite of the doubt cast upon his courtesy, Tom rather liked it, though he had nothing to say for himself but a reproachful, "Now, Polly, that's too bad." "True, nevertheless. You must come and see my pets, Maud, for my cat and bird live together as happily as brother and sister," said Polly, turning to Maud, who devoured every word she said. "That's not saying much for them," muttered Tom, feeling that Polly ought to address more of her conversation to him. "Polly knows what she's talking about. Her brothers appreciate their sisters," observed Fanny in her sharp tone. "And Polly appreciates her brothers. Don't forget to add that, ma'am," answered Tom. "Did I tell you that Will was going to college?" broke in Polly, to avert the rising storm. "Hope he'll enjoy himself," observed Tom, with the air of a man who has passed through all the mysteries, and reached that state of sublime indifference which juniors seem to pride themselves upon. "I think he will. He is so fond of study, and is so anxious to improve every opportunity. I only hope he won't overwork and get sick, as so many boys do," said simple Polly, with such a respectful belief in the eager thirst for knowledge of collegians as a class, that Tom regarded the deluded girl with a smile of lofty pity from the heights of his vast and varied experience. "Guess he won't hurt himself," I'll see that he don't study too hard." And Tom's eyes twinkled as they used to, while he planned his boyish pranks. "I'm afraid you can't be trusted as a guide, if various rumors I've heard are true," said Polly, looking up at him with a wistful expression that caused his face to assume the sobriety of an owl's. "Base slanders. I'm as steady as a clock, an ornament to my class and a model young man, ain't I, Mother?" And Tom patted her thin cheek with a caressing hand, sure of one firm friend in her. For when he ceased to be a harum-scarum boy, Mrs. Shaw began to take great pride in her son, and he, missing Grandma, tried to fill her place with his feeble mother. "Yes, dear, you are all I could ask." And Mrs. Shaw looked up at him with such affection and confidence in her eyes that Polly gave Tom the first approving look she had vouchsafed him since she came. Why Tom should look troubled and turn grave all at once, she couldn't understand, but she liked to see him stroke his mother's cheek so softly, as he stood with his head resting on the high back of her chair. For Polly fancied that he felt a man's pity for her weakness, and was learning a son's patient love for a mother who had much to bear with him. "I'm so glad you're going to be here all winter, for we are going to be very merry, and I shall enjoy taking you around with me," began Fanny, forgetting Polly's plan for a moment. Polly shook her head decidedly. "It sounds very nice, but it can't be done, Fan, for I've come to work, not play, to save, not spend, and parties will be quite out of the question for me." "You don't intend to work all the time, without a bit of fun, I hope?" cried Fanny, dismayed at the idea. "I mean to do what I've undertaken, and not to be tempted away from my purpose by anything. I shouldn't be fit to give lessons if I was up late, should I? And how far would my earnings go toward a dress, carriages, and all the little expenses which would come if I set up for a young lady in society? I can't do both, and I'm not going to try, but I can pick up bits of fun as I go along, and be contented with free concerts and lectures, seeing you pretty often, and every Sunday Will is to spend with me, so I shall have quite as much dissipation as is good for me." "If you don't come to my parties, I'll never forgive you," said Fanny, as Polly paused, while Tom chuckled inwardly at the idea of calling visits from a brother dissipation. "Any small party where it will do to wear a plain black silk I can come to, but the big ones mustn't be thought of, thank you." It was charming to see the resolution of Polly's face when she said that, for she knew her weakness, and beyond that black silk she had determined not to go. Fanny said no more, for she felt quite sure that Polly would relent when the time came, and she planned to give her a pretty dress for a Christmas present, so that one excuse should be removed. "I say, Polly, won't you give some of us fellows music lessons? Somebody wants me to play, and I'd rather learn of you than any Senior Twankydillo," said Tom, who didn't find the conversation interesting. "Oh, yes, if any of you boys honestly want to learn, and will behave yourselves, I'll take you, but I shall charge extra," answered Polly, with a wicked sparkle of the eye, though her face was quite sober, and her tone delightfully businesslike. "Why, Polly, Tom isn't a boy, he's 20, and he says I must treat him with respect. Besides, he's engaged, and does put on such airs," broke in Maud, who regarded her brother as a venerable being. "Who is the little girl?" asked Polly, taking the news as a joke. "Trix! Why, didn't you know it?" answered Maud, as if it had been an event of national importance. "No! Is it true, Fan?" And Polly turned to her friend with a face full of surprise, while Tom struck an imposing attitude and affected absence of mind. "I forgot to tell you in my last letter. It's just out, and we don't like it very well," observed Fanny, who would have preferred to be engaged first herself. "It's a very nice thing, and I am perfectly satisfied," announced Mrs. Shaw, rousing from a slight doze. "Polly looks as if she didn't believe it. Haven't I the appearance of the happiest man alive?" asked Tom, wondering if it could be pity which he saw in the steady eyes fixed on him. "No, I don't think you have," she said slowly.
"How the deuce should a man look, then?" cried Tom, rather nettled at her sober reception of the grand news.
"As if he had learned to care for someone a great deal more than for himself," answered Polly, with sudden color in her cheeks, and a sudden softening of the voice, as her eyes turned away from Tom, who was the picture of a complacent dandy, from the topmost curl of his auburn head to the tips of his aristocratic boots.
"Tommy's quenched. I agree with you, Polly. I never liked Trix, and I hope it's only a boy and girl fancy that will soon die a natural death," said Mr. Shaw, who seemed to find it difficult to help falling into a brown study, in spite of the lively chatter going on about him. Shaw, Jr., being highly incensed at the disrespectful manner in which his engagement was treated, tried to assume a superb air of indifference, and finding that a decided failure, was about to stroll out of the room with a comprehensive nod, when his mother called after him, "Where are you going, dear?" "To see Trix, of course. Goodbye, Polly."
And Mr. Thomas departed, hoping that by this skilful change of tone, from ardent impatience to condescending coolness, he had impressed one hearer at least with the fact that he regarded Trix as the star of his existence, and Polly as a presuming little chit. If he could have heard her laugh and Fanny's remarks, his wrath would have boiled over. Fortunately, he was spared the trial, and went away, hoping that the coquettishness of his Trix would make him forget Polly's look when she answered his question. "My dear, that boy is the most deluded creature you ever saw," began Fanny as soon as the front door banged. Belle and Trix both tried to catch him, and the slyest got him, for in spite of his airs, he is as soft-hearted as a baby. You see, Trix has broken off 2 engagements already, and the 3rd time she got jilted herself. Such a fuss she made, I declare it was really absurd. But I do think she felt it very much, for she wouldn't go out at all, got thin and pale and blue, and was really quite touching. I pitied her and had her hear a good deal, and Tom took her part. He always does stand up for the crushed ones, and that's good of him, I allow. Well, she did the Forsaken very prettily, let Tom amuse her and led him on, till the poor fellow lost his wits, and finding her crying one day about her hat, which wasn't becoming, he thought she was mourning for Mr. Banks, and so, to comfort her, the goose proposed. That was all she wanted. She snapped him up at once, and there he is in a nice scrape, for since her engagement she is as sprightly as ever, flirts awfully with anyone who comes along, and keeps Tom in a fume all the time. I really don't think he cares for her half as much as he makes himself believe, but he'll stand by her through thick and thin, rather than do as Banks did. Poor Tom, was all Polly said, when Fan had poured the story into her ear as they sat whispering in the sofa corner. My only consolation is that Trix will break off the affair before spring. She always does, so that she may be free for the summer campaign. It won't hurt Tom, but I hate to have him make a fool of himself out of pity, for he is more of a man than he seems, and I don't want anyone to plague him." "No one but yourself," said Polly, smiling. "Well, that's all fair. He is a torment sometimes, but I'm rather fond of him in spite of it. I get so tired of the other fellows. They're such absurd things, and when Tom is in his good mood, he is very nice and quite refreshing." "I'm glad to hear it," said Polly, making a mental note of the fact. "Yes, and when Grandma was ill, he was perfectly devoted. I didn't know the boy had so much gentleness in him. He took her death sadly to heart, for, though he didn't say much, he was very grave and steady for a long time. I tried to comfort him, and we had 2 or 3 real sweet little talks together, and seemed to get acquainted for the first time. It was very nice. But it didn't last. Good times never do with us. We soon got back into the old way, and now we hector one another just as before." Fanny sighed, then yawned, and fell into her usual listless attitude, as if the brief excitement of Polly's coming had begun to subside. Walk home with me and see my funny little room. It's bright now, and the air will do you good. Come, both of you, and have a frolic as we used to," said Polly, for the red sunset now burning in the west seemed to invite them out. They agreed, and soon the three were walking briskly away to Polly's new home, in a quiet street, where a few old trees rustled in the summer, and the morning sun shone pleasantly in winter-time. "The way into my parlor is up a winding stair," sang Polly, running up 2 flights of broad old-fashioned steps and opening the door of a back room, out of which streamed the welcome glow of firelight. "These are my pets, Maud," she added, pausing on the threshold and beckoning the girls to look in quietly. On the rug, luxuriously basking in the warmth, lay a gray kitten, and close by, meditatively roosting on one leg, stood a plump canary, who cocked his bright eye at the newcomers, gave a loud chirp, as if to wake his comrade, and then flew straight to Polly's shoulder, where he broke into a joyful song to welcome his mistress home. "Allow me to introduce my family," said Polly. "This noisy little chap the boys named Nicodemus, and this dozy cat is called Ashputtel, because the joy of her life is to get in among the cinders. Now, take off your things and let me do the honors, for you are to stop to tea, and the carriage is to come for you at 8. I arranged it with your mother while you were upstairs." "I want to see everything," said Maud, when the hats were off and the hands warmed. "So you shall, for I think my housekeeping arrangements will amuse you." Then Polly showed her kingdom, and the three had a merry time over it. The big piano took up so much room there was no place for a bed, but Polly proudly displayed the resources of her chintz-covered couch, for the back let down, the seat lifted up, and inside were all the pillows and blankets. "So you see, it's very convenient and yet out of the way in the daytime, for 2 or 3 of my pupils come to me," explained Polly. Then there was a bright drugget over the faded carpet. The little rocking-chair and sewing-table stood at one window. The ivy ran all over the other, and hid the banqueting performances which went on in that corner. Bookshelves hung over the sofa, a picture or 2 on the walls, and a great vase of autumn leaves and grasses beautified the low chimney-piece. It was a very humble little room, but Polly had done her best to make it pleasant, and it already had a homelike look, with the cheery fire and the household pets chirping and purring confidingly on the rug. "How nice it is!" exclaimed Maud, as she emerged from the big closet where Polly kept her stores. "Such a cunning tea-kettle and saucepan, and a tete-a-tete set, and lots of good things to eat. Do have toast for tea, Polly, and let me make it with the new toasting fork. It's so much fun to play cook." Fanny was not so enthusiastic as her sister, for her eyes saw many traces of what seemed like poverty to her. But Polly was so happy, so satisfied with her small establishment, so full of bright hopes and plans, that her friend had not the heart to find a fault or suggest an improvement, and sat where she was told, laughing and talking, while the others got tea. "This will be a country supper, girls," said Polly, bustling about. "Here is real cream, brown bread, homemade cake, and honey from my own beehives. Mother fitted me out with such a supply. I'm glad to have a party, for I can't eat it all quick enough. Butter the toast, Maudie, and put that little cover over it. Tell me when the kettle boils, and don't step on Nicodemus, whatever you do." "What a capital housekeeper you will make some day," said Fanny, as she watched Polly spread her table with a neatness and dispatch which was pleasant to behold. "Ha! Yes, it's good practice," laughed Polly, filling her tiny teapot, and taking her place behind the tray with a matronly air, which was the best joke of the whole. "This is the most delicious party I ever went to," observed Maud, with her mouth full of honey, when the feast was well under way. "I do wish I could have a nice little room like this, and a cat and a bird that wouldn't eat each other up, and a dear little tea kettle, and make just as much toast as I like." Such a peal of laughter greeted Maud's pensive aspiration that Miss Mills smiled over her solitary cup of tea, and little Nick burst into a perfect ecstasy of song as he sat on the sugar bowl, helping himself. "I don't care for the toast in the kettle, but I do envy you your good spirits, Polly," said Fanny, as the merriment subsided. "I am so tired of everybody and everything. It seems sometimes as if I should die of ennui. Don't you ever feel so? Things worry me sometimes, but I just catch up a broom and sweep, or wash hard, or walk, or go at something with all my might, and I usually find that by the time I get through, the worry is gone, or I've got courage enough to bear it without grumbling," answered Polly, cutting the brown loaf energetically. "I can't do those things, you know. There's no need of it, and I don't think they'll cure my worrying," said Fanny, languidly feeding Ashputtel, who sat decorously beside her at the table, winking at the cream pot. "A little poverty would do you good, Fan. Just enough necessity to keep you busy till you find how good work is, and when you once learn that, you won't complain of ennui any more," returned Polly, who had taken kindly the hard lesson which 20 years of cheerful poverty had taught her. "Mercy, no. I should hate that. But I wish someone would invent a new amusement for rich people. I'm dead sick of parties and flirtations, trying to outdress my neighbors and going the same round year after year, like a squirrel in a cage." Fanny's tone was bitter as well as discontented, her face sad as well as listless, and Polly had an instinctive feeling that some trouble, more real than any she had ever known before, was lying at her friend's heart. That was not the time to speak of it, but Polly resolved to stand ready to offer sympathy, if nothing more, whenever the confidential minute came. And her manner was so kind, so comfortable, that Fanny felt its silent magic, grew more cheerful in the quiet atmosphere of that little room, and when they said good night, after an old-time gossip by the fire, she kissed her hostess warmly, saying with a grateful look, "Polly, dear, I shall come often. You do me so much good." Chapter 9. Lessons. The first few weeks were hard ones, for Polly had not yet outgrown her natural shyness, and going among so many strangers caused her frequent panics. But her purpose gave her courage, and when the ice was once broken, her little pupils quickly learned to love her. The novelty soon wore off, and though she thought she was prepared for drudgery, she found it very tedious to go on doing the same thing day after day. Then she was lonely, for Will could only come once a week. Her leisure hours were Fanny's busiest, and the bits of pleasure were so few and far between that they only tantalized her. Even her small housekeeping lost its charms, for Polly was a social creature, and the solitary meals were often sad ones. Ashputtel and Nick did their best to cheer her, but they too seemed to pine for country freedom and home atmosphere. Poor Puttel, after gazing wistfully out of the window at the gaunt city cats skulking about the yard, would retire to the rug and curl herself up as if all hope of finding congenial society had failed, while little Nick would sing till he vibrated on his perch, without receiving any response except an inquisitive chirp from the pert sparrows, who seemed to twit him with his captivity. Yes, by the time the little tea-kettle had lost its brightness, Polly had decided that getting one's living was no joke, and many of her brilliant hopes had shared the fate of the little kettle. If one could only make the sacrifice all at once and done with it, then it would seem easier. But to keep up a daily sacrifice of one's wishes, tastes, and pleasures is rather a hard task, especially when one is pretty, young, and cheerful. Lessons all day, a highly instructive lecture, books over a solitary fire, or music with no audience but a sleepy cat, and a bird with his head tucked under his wing for evening entertainment, was not exactly what might be called festive. So, in spite of her brave resolutions, Polly did long for a little fun sometimes, and after saying virtuously to herself at 9, Yes, it is much wiser and better for me to go to bed early and be ready for tomorrow's work. She would lie awake hearing the carriages roll to and fro, and imagining the merry girls inside going to party, opera, or play, till Mrs. Dodd's hot pillow might as well have been stuffed with nettles for any sleep it brought, or any use it was except to catch and hide the tears that dropped on it when Polly's heart was very full. Another thorn that wounded our Polly in her first attempt to make her way through the thicket that always bars a woman's progress was the discovery that working for a living shuts a good many doors in one's face, even in democratic America. As Fanny's guest, she had been, in spite of poverty, kindly received wherever her friend took her, both as child and woman. Now things were changed. The kindly people patronized, the careless forgot all about her, and even Fanny, with all her affection, felt that Polly the music teacher would not be welcome in many places where Polly the young lady had been accepted as Miss Shaw's friend. Some of the girls still nodded amiably, but never invited her to visit them. Others merely dropped their eyelids and went by without speaking, while a good many ignored her as entirely as if she had been invisible. These things hurt Polly more than she would confess, for at home everyone worked, and everyone was respected for it. She tried not to care, but girls feel little slights keenly, and more than once Polly was severely tempted to give up her plan and run away to the safe shelter at home. Fanny never failed to ask her to every sort of festivity in the Shaw mansion, but after a few trials, Polly firmly declined everything but informal visits when the family were alone. She soon found that even the new black silk wasn't fine enough for Fanny's smallest party, and after receiving a few of the expressive glances by which women convey their opinion of their neighbor's toilette, and overhearing a joke or two about that inevitable dress and the little blackbird, Polly folded away the once treasured frock, saying with a choke in her voice, "I'll wear it for Will. He likes it, and clothes can't change his love for me." I'm afraid the wholesome sweetness of Polly's nature was getting a little soured by these troubles, but before lasting harm was done, she received from an unexpected source some of the real help which teaches young people how to bear these small crosses, by showing them the heavier ones they have escaped, and by giving them an idea of the higher pleasures one may earn in the good old-fashioned ways that keep hearts sweet, heads sane, and hands busy. Everybody has their days of misfortune, and Polly was beginning to think she had more than her share. One of these ended in a way which influenced her whole life, so we will record it. It began early, for the hard-hearted little grate wouldn't behave itself till she had used up a ruinous quantity of kindling. Then she scalded poor Ashputtel by upsetting her coffee-pot, and instead of a leisurely, cozy meal, had to hurry away uncomfortably, for everything went wrong, even to the coming off of both bonnet strings in the last dreadful scramble. Being late, she of course forgot her music, and hurrying back for it, fell into a puddle which capped the climax of her despair. Such a trying morning as that was. Polly felt out of tune herself, and all the pianos seemed to need a tuner as much as she did. The pupils were unusually dull, and two sisters announced that their mamma was going to take them to the South, whither she was suddenly called. This was a blow, for they had just begun, and Polly hadn't the face to send in a bill for a whole quarter, though her plans and calculations were sadly disturbed by the failure of that sum. Trudging home to dinner, tired and disappointed, poor Polly received another blow, which hurt her more than the loss of all her pupils. As she went hurrying along with a big music book in one hand and a paper bag of rolls for tea in the other, she saw Tom and Trix coming. As she watched them while they slowly approached, looking so healthy and handsome and happy, it seemed to Polly as if all the sunshine and good walking was on their side of the street. all the wintry wind and mud on hers. Longing to see a friendly face and receive a kind word, she crossed over, meaning to nod and smile at least. Trix saw her first, and suddenly became absorbed in the distant horizon. Tom apparently did not see her, for his eyes were fixed on a fine horse just prancing by. Polly thought he had seen her, and approached with such a curious little flutter at her heart, for if Tom cut her, she felt that her cup would be full. On they came, Trix intent on the view, Tom staring at the handsome horse, and Polly with red cheeks, expectant eyes, and the brown bundle in full sight. One dreadful minute as they came parallel, and no one spoke or bowed. Then it was all over, and Polly went on, feeling as if someone had slapped her in the face. She wouldn't have believed it of Tom. It was all the doings of that horrid Trix. Well, she wouldn't trouble him any more. If he was such a snob as to be ashamed of her, just because she carried bundles and worked for her bread. She clutched the paper bag fiercely as she said this to herself, then her eyes filled and her lips trembled as she added, "How could he do it before her, too?" Now Tom was quite guiltless of this offence, and had always nodded to Polly when they met, but it so happened he had always been alone till now, and that was why it cut so deeply, especially as Polly had never approved of Trix. Before she could clear her eyes or steady her face, a gentleman met her, lifted his hat, smiled, and said pleasantly, "Good morning, Miss Polly. I'm glad to meet you." Then with a sudden change of voice and manner, he added, "I beg pardon. Is anything the matter that I can be of service?" It was very awkward, but it couldn't be helped, and all Polly could do was to tell the truth and make the best of it. "It's very silly, but it hurts me to be cut by my old friends. I shall get used to it presently, I dare say." Mr. Sidney glanced back, recognized the couple behind them, and turned round with a disgusted expression. Polly was fumbling for her handkerchief, and without a word, he took both book and bundle from her. A little bit of kindness that meant a good deal just then. Polly felt it, and it did her good. Hastily wiping the traitorous eyes, she laughed and said cheerfully, "There, I'm all right again, thank you. Don't trouble yourself with my parcels." "No trouble, I assure you. And this little book reminds me of what I was about to say. Have you an hour to spare for my little niece? Her mother wants her to begin, and desired me to make the inquiry." "Did she really?" And Polly looked up at him, as if she suspected him of inventing the whole thing out of kindness. Mr. Sidney smiled, and taking a note from his pocket, presented it, saying with a reproachful look, "Behold the proof of my truth, and never doubt again." Polly begged pardon, read the note from the little girl's mother, which was to have been left at her room if she was absent, and gave the bearer a very grateful look as she accepted this welcome addition to her pupils. Well pleased at the success of his mission, Sidney artfully led the conversation to music, and for a time Polly forgot her woes, talking enthusiastically on her favorite theme. As she reclaimed her book and bag at her own door, she said in her honest way, "Thank you very much for trying to make me forget my foolish little troubles." "Then let me say one thing more. Though appearances are against him, I don't believe Tom Shaw saw you. Miss Trix is equal to that sort of thing, but it isn't like Tom, for with all his foppery, he is a good fellow at heart." As Mr. Sidney said this, Polly held out her hand with a hearty, "Thank you for that." The young man shook the little hand in the grey woolen glove, gave her exactly the same bow which he did the Honourable Mrs. Davenport, and went away, leaving Polly to walk upstairs and address Poodle with the peculiar remark, "You are a true gentleman. So kind to say that about Tom. I think it's so anyway, and won't I teach Minnie in my very best style?" Poodle purred, Nick chirped approvingly, and Polly ate her dinner with a better appetite than she had expected. But at the bottom of her heart there was a sore spot still, and the afternoon lessons dragged dismally. It was dusk when she got home, and as she sat in the firelight eating her bread and milk, several tears bedewed the little rolls, and even the home honey had a bitter taste. "Now, all this won't do," she broke out all at once. "This is silly and wicked, and can't be allowed. I'll try the old plan and put myself right by doing some little kindness to somebody. Now, what shall it be? Oh, I know! Fan is going to a party tonight. I'll run up and help her dress. She likes to have me, and I enjoy seeing the pretty things. Yes, and I'll take her 2 or 3 clusters of my Daphne. It's so sweet." Up got Polly, and taking her little posy, trotted away to the Shaws, determined to be happy and contented in spite of tricks and hard work. She found Fanny enduring torment under the hands of the hairdresser, who was doing his best to spoil her hair and distort her head with masses of curls, braids, frizzles, and puffs. For, though I discreetly refrain from any particular description, still, judging from the present fashions, I think one may venture to predict that 6 years hence they would be something frightful. How kind of you, Polly. I was just wishing you were here to arrange my flowers. These lovely daphnes will give odor to my camellias, and you were a dear to bring them. There's my dress. How do you like it? Said Fanny, hardly daring to lift her eyes from under the yellow tower on her head. It's regularly splendid, but how do you ever get into it? Answered Polly, surveying with girlish interest the cloud of pink and white lace that lay upon the bed. It's fearfully and wonderfully made, but distractingly becoming, as you shall see. Trix thinks I'm going to wear blue, so she has got a green one, and told Belle it would spoil the effect of mine, as we are to be much together, of course. Wasn't that sweet of her? Belle came and told me just in time, and I got pink, so my amiable sister, that is to be, won't succeed in her pretty little plot. I guess she has been reading the life of Josephine Bonaparte. You know, she made a pretty lady of whom she was jealous sit beside her on a green sofa, which set off her own white dress, and spoilt the blue one of her guest, answered Polly, busy with the flowers. Trix never reads anything. You are the one to pick up clever little stories. I'll remember and use that one. Am I done? Yes, that is charming, isn't it, Polly? And Fan rose to inspect the success of Monsieur's long labour. You know I don't appreciate a stylish coiffure as I ought. So I like your hair in the old way best, but this is the thing, I suppose, and not a word must be said. Of course it is. Why, child, I have frizzed and burnt my hair so that I look like an old maniac with it in its natural state, and have to repair damages as well as I can. Now put the flowers just here. And Fanny laid a pink camellia in a nest of fuzz, and stuck a spray of daphne straight up at the back of her head. Oh, Fan, don't! It looks horridly so, cried Polly, longing to add a little beauty to her friend's sallow face by a graceful adjustment of the flowers. Can't help it, that's the way, and so it must be, answered Fan, planting another sprig halfway up the tower. Polly groaned and offered no more suggestions as the work went on. But when Fan was finished from top to toe, she admired all she honestly could, and tried to keep her thoughts to herself. But her frank face betrayed her, for Fanny turned on her suddenly, saying, You may as well free your mind, Polly, for I see by your eyes that something don't suit. I was only thinking of what your dear grandma once said, that modesty had gone out of fashion, answered Polly, glancing at the waist of her friend's dress, which consisted of a belt, a bit of lace, and a pair of shoulder straps. Fanny laughed good-naturedly, saying as she clasped her necklace, If I had such shoulders as yours, I shouldn't care what the fashion was. Now don't preach, but put my cloak on nicely, and come along, for I'm to meet Tom and Trix, and promise to be there early. Polly was to be left at home, after depositing Fan at Belle's. I feel as if I was going myself, she said as they rolled along. I wish you were, and you would be, Polly, if you weren't such a resolute thing. I have teased and begged and offered anything I have if you'll only break your absurd vow, and come and enjoy yourself. Thank you, but I won't, so don't trouble your kind heart about me. I'm all right, said Polly stoutly. But when they drew up before the lighted house, and she found herself in the midst of the pleasant stir of festivity, the coming and going of carriages, the glimpses of bright colors, forms, and faces, the bursts of music, and a general atmosphere of gaiety, Polly felt that she wasn't all right, and as she drove away for a dull evening in her lonely little room, she just cried as heartily as any child denied a stick of candy. "It's dreadfully wicked of me, but I can't help it," she sobbed to herself in the corner of the carriage. "That music sets me all in a twitter, and I should have looked nice in Fan's blue tarlatan. I know that I could behave myself as well as anyone and have lots of partners, though I'm not in that set. Oh, just one good gallop with Mr. Sidney or Tom. No, Tom wouldn't ask me there, and I wouldn't accept if he did. Oh dear, oh me, oh my, I wish I was as old and homely and good and happy as Miss Mills." So Molly made her moan, and by the time she got home, she was just in the mood to go to bed and cry herself to sleep, as girls have a way of doing when their small affliction becomes unbearable. But Polly didn't get a chance to be miserable very long, for as she went upstairs, feeling like the most injured girl in the world, she caught a glimpse of Miss Mills, sewing away with such a bright face that she couldn't resist stopping for a word or two. "Sit down, my dear. I'm glad to see you, but excuse me if I go on with my work, as I'm in a driving hurry to get these things done tonight," said the brisk little lady with a smile and a nod, as she took a new needleful of thread and ran up a seam as if for a wager. "Let me help you, then. I'm lazy and cross, and it will do me good," said Polly, sitting down with the resigned feeling, "Well, if I can't be happy, I can be useful, perhaps." "Thank you, my dear. Yes, you can just hem the skirt while I put in the sleeves, and that will be a great lift." Polly put on her thimble in silence, but as Miss Mills spread the white flannel over her lap, she exclaimed, "Why, it looks like a shroud. Is it one?" "No, dear, thank God it isn't, but it might have been if we hadn't saved the poor little soul," cried Miss Mills, with a sudden brightening of the face, which made it beautiful, in spite of the stiff grey curl that bobbed on each temple, the want of teeth, and a crooked nose. "Will you tell me about it? I like to hear your adventures and good works so much," said Polly, ready to be amused by anything that made her forget herself. "Ah, my dear, it's a very common story, and that's the saddest part of it. I'll tell you all about it, for I think you may be able to help me. Last night I watched with poor Mary Floyd. She's dying of consumption, you know," began Miss Mills, as her nimble fingers flew, and her kind old face beamed over the work, as if she put a blessing in with each stitch. "Mary was very low, but about midnight fell asleep, and I was trying to keep things quiet when Miss Finn, she's the woman of the house, came and beckoned me out with a scared face. 'Little Jane has up and nearly died, and I don't know what to do,' she said, leading me up to the attic." "Who is little Jane?" broke in Polly, dropping her work. "I only know her as a pale, shy girl who went in and out and seldom spoke to anyone. Mrs. Finn told me she was poor, but a busy, honest little thing who didn't mix with the other folk but lived and worked alone. She's looked so downhearted and pale for a week that I thought she was sick, and asked her about it," said Mrs. Finn, "but she thanked me in her bashful way and said she was pretty well, so I let her alone. But tonight, as I went up to bed, I was kind of impressed to look in and see how the poor thing did, for she hadn't left the room all day. I did look in, and here's what I found." As Miss Finn ended, she opened the door of the back attic, and I saw about as sad a sight as the old eyes ever looked at. "Oh, what?" cried Polly, pale now with interest. "A bare room, cold as a barn, and on the bed a dead little white face that almost broke my heart, so thin, so patient, and so young. On the table was a bottle half full of laudanum, an old pocket-book, and a letter. Read that, my dear, and don't think too hard of little Jane." Polly took out the bit of paper Miss Mills gave her and read these words: "Dear Mrs. Finn, please forgive me for the trouble I make you, but I don't see any other way. I can't get work that pays enough to keep me. The doctor says I can't be well unless I rest. I hate to be a burden, so I'm going away not to trouble anybody any more. I've sold my things to pay what I owe you. Please let me be as I am, and don't let people come and look at me. I hope it isn't very wicked, but there don't seem any room for me in the world, and I'm not afraid to die now, though I should be if I stayed and got bad because I hadn't strength to keep right. Give my love to your sweet baby, and so goodbye, goodbye, Jane Bryant. Oh, Miss Mills, how dreadful! Cried Polly, with her eyes so full she could hardly read the little letter. Not so dreadful as it might have been, but a bitter sad thing to see that child, only 17, lying there in her little clean old nightgown, waiting for death to come and take her because there didn't seem to be any room for her in the world. Ah, well, we saved her, for it wasn't too late, thank heaven, and the first thing she said was, "Oh, why did you bring me back?" I've been nursing her all day, hearing her story and trying to show her that there is room and a welcome for her. Her mother died a year ago, and since then she has been struggling all alone. She is one of the timid, innocent, humble creatures who can't push their way, and so get put aside and forgotten. She's tried all sorts of poorly paid work, couldn't live on it decently, got discouraged, sick, frightened, and couldn't see no refuge from the big bad world, but to get out of it while she wasn't afraid to die. A very old story, my dear, new and dreadful it seems to you, and I think it won't do you any harm to see and help this little girl, who has gone through such dark places that you are never like to know. I will indeed. I'll do all I can. Where is she now? Asked Polly, touched to the heart by the story. So simple, yet so sad. There. And Miss Mills pointed to the door of her own little bedroom. She was well enough to be moved tonight, so I brought her home and laid her safely in my bed. Poor little soul! She looked about her for a minute, then the lost look went away, and she gave a great sigh, and took my hand in both her thin bits of ones, and said, "Oh, ma'am, I feel as if I'd been born into a new world. Help me to begin again, and I'll do better." So I told her she was my child now, and might rest here, sure of a home as long as I had one. As Miss Mills spoke in her motherly tone, and cast a proud and happy look toward the warm and quiet nest in which she had sheltered this friendless little sparrow, feeling sure that God meant her to keep it from falling to the ground, Polly put both arms about her neck, and kissed her withered cheek with as much loving reverence as if she had been a splendid saint, for in the likeness of this plain old maid she saw the lovely charity that blesses and saves the world. "How good you are, dear Miss Mills! Tell me what to do. Let me help you. I'm ready for anything," said Polly, very humbly, for her own troubles looked so small and foolish beside the stern hardships, which had nearly had so tragical an end that she felt heartily ashamed of herself, and quite burned to atone for them. Miss Mills stopped to stroke the fresh cheek opposite, to smile and say, "Then, Polly, I think I'll ask you to go in and say a friendly word to my little girl. The sight of you will do her good, and you have just the right way of comforting people without making a fuss." "Have I?" said Polly, looking much gratified by the words. "Oh, yes, dear. You've the gift of sympathy and the rare art of showing it without offending. I wouldn't let many girls in to see my poor Jenny, because they'd only flutter and worry her, but you'll know what to do, so go, and take this wrapper with you. It's done now, thanks to your nimble fingers." Polly threw the warm garment over her arm, feeling a thrill of gratitude that it was to wrap a living girl in, and not to hide away a young heart that had grown cold too soon. Pushing open the door, she went quietly into the dimly lighted room, and on the pillow saw a face that drew her to it with an irresistible power, for it was touched by a solemn shadow that made its youth pathetic. As she paused at the bedside, thinking the girl asleep, a pair of hollow, dark eyes opened wide, and looked up at her, startled at first, then softening with pleasure at the sight of the bonny face before them, and then a humble, beseeching expression filled them, as if asking pardon for the rash act nearly committed, and pity for the hard fate that prompted it. Polly read the language of these eyes, and answered their mute prayer with a simple eloquence that said more than any words, for she just stooped down and kissed the poor child with her own eyes full, and lips that trembled with the sympathy she could not tell. Jenny put both arms about her neck and began to shed the quiet tears that so refresh and comfort heavy hearts when a tender touch unseals the fountain where they lie. "Everybody is so kind," she sobbed, "and I was so wicked I don't deserve it." "Oh, yes, you do. Don't think of that, but rest and let us pet you. The old life was too hard for such a little thing as you, and we are going to try and make the new one ever so much easier and happier," said Polly, forgetting everything except that this was a little girl like herself who needed heartening up. "Do you live here?" asked Jenny when her tears were wiped away, still clinging to the new-found friend. "Yes, Miss Mills lets me have a little room upstairs, and there I have my cat and bird, my piano and my posy pots, and live like a queen. You must come up and see me tomorrow if you're able. I'm often lonely, for there are no young people in the house to play with me," answered Polly, smiling hospitably. "Do you sew?" asked Jenny. "No, I'm a music teacher, and trot round giving lessons all day." "How beautiful it sounds, and how happy you must be, so strong and pretty, and able to go around making music all the time," sighed Jenny, looking with respectful admiration at the plump, firm hand held in both her thin and feeble ones. It did sound pleasant even to Polly's ears, and she felt suddenly so rich and so contented that she seemed a different creature from the silly girl who cried because she couldn't go to the party. It passed through her mind like a flash, the contrast between her life and that of the wan creature lying before her, and she felt as if she could not give enough out of her abundance to this needy little sister, who had nothing in the wide world but the life just saved to her. That minute did more for Polly than many sermons or the wisest books, for it brought her face to face with bitter truths, showed her the dark side of life, and seemed to blow away her little vanities, her frivolous desires, like a wintry wind that left a wholesome atmosphere behind. Sitting on the bedside, Polly listened while Jane told the story which was so new to her listener that every word sank deep into her heart and never was forgotten. "Now you must go to sleep. Don't cry nor think nor do anything but rest. That will please Miss Mills best. I'll leave the doors open and play you a lullaby that you can't resist. Good night, dear." And with another kiss, Polly went away to sit in the darkness of her own room, playing her softest airs until the tired eyes below were shut, and the little Jane seemed to float away on a sea of pleasant sounds into the happier life which had just dawned for her. Polly had fully intended to be very miserable and cry herself to sleep, but when she lay down at last, her pillow seemed very soft, her little room very lovely, with the firelight flickering on all the home-like objects, and her new-blown roses breathing her a sweet good night. She no longer felt an injured, hard-working, unhappy Polly, but as if quite burdened with blessings for which she wasn't half grateful enough. She had heard of poverty and suffering, in the vague, far-off way which is all that many girls safe in happy homes ever know of it, but she had now seen it in a shape which she could feel and understand, and life grew more earnest to her from that minute. So much to do in the great busy world, and she had done so little. Where should she begin? Then, like an answer, came little Jenny's words, now taking a new significance to Polly's mind. To be strong and beautiful and go round making music all the time. Yes, she could do that. And with a very earnest prayer, Polly asked for the strength of an upright soul, the beauty of a tender heart, the power to make her life a sweet and stirring song, helpful while it lasted, remembered when it died. Little Jane's last thought had been to wish with all her might that God would bless the dear, kind girl up there and give her all she asked. I think both prayers, although too humble to be put in words, went up together, for in the fullness of time they were beautifully answered. Thank you for joining us for Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott. Please be sure to tell me what other books you'd like to listen to. I'm so glad you joined me. I'll talk to you again soon.